If your retirement plan is built around drawing your income from a TFSA and a non-registered account, so your tax return shows almost nothing, I want you to hear this before that plan gets locked in. That zero on your return can turn into a $50,000 problem waiting for you on the other side of age 71. Most people treat a low tax bill as proof they are winning. In the current system, that is not always true. A retiree who pays close to $0 in tax at 65 is often the same retiree who gets hit with a 15% OAS clawback and a marginal tax rate over 40% once the RRIF withdrawals begin. I have watched this happen to people who did everything by the book, people who were proud of that zero on their return for years before they understood what it was quietly building toward. There is a name for what quietly builds up behind a zero tax return. People who study this call it the RRIF tax bomb. Every year an RRSP sits untouched, it keeps growing, and the growth itself is the problem, because none of it has ever been taxed. The government still forces withdrawals starting the year you turn 72, whether you need that income or not, and by then the account is often much larger than it needed to be. Here is the part that surprises most people. Paying a small amount of tax now, somewhere in the range of 7% to 9%, can protect a much larger share of your OAS and your estate later. It sounds backwards the first time you hear it. Once you see the two paths side by side, though, the zero tax plan stops looking like the smart one. In 2026, a retired couple in Canada, both over 65, can bring in up to $55,320 in income before they owe a cent of federal tax. That is not a trick or a workaround. It comes from stacking 3 credits that already exist for people at your stage of life, and most retirees never claim the full amount because nobody walks them through how the pieces fit together. The first piece is the basic personal amount, sitting at $16,452 for 2026. Every Canadian gets that, retired or not. The second piece is the age amount, worth $9,208 once you turn 65. The third is the pension income amount, worth $2,000 on eligible pension or RRIF income. Add those together, and a single retiree can shelter $27,660 in income each year. A couple, each claiming the credits on their own return, can shelter double that, since each spouse files a separate return with their own set of credits. This is not loophole hunting. These are credits the government built for exactly this stage of life, the same way a property tax deferral program exists for a senior on a fixed income, or a reduced transit pass exists once you hit a certain age. Using them properly is not clever. It is just paying attention to what you are already entitled to, instead of leaving it on the table out of habit. Now here is where the shield gets thinner for singles. The age amount is not locked in place. It is income tested, meaning it was designed to help retirees with modest income rather than everyone equally. Once your net income passes $46,432, that $9,208 credit starts shrinking at a rate of 15 cents for every extra dollar you earn above the threshold. A single retiree pulling in $50,000 has already lost a real slice of that credit. A couple earning the same combined household income, but splitting it across 2 returns, can often keep both partners under the threshold and keep the full credit on each side. So the shield is real, and it is worth claiming properly. But it rewards couples more than it rewards singles, and it shrinks faster than most people expect once other income starts stacking on top of it. Here is the trade-off most people miss. The less you touch your RRSP now, while you are sitting comfortably inside that shield, the bigger that account gets by the time the government forces you to start withdrawing from it. You are not avoiding a tax bill. You are postponing it and letting it grow while you wait quietly in the background, the same way an unpaid property tax bill grows once interest starts stacking on it. If you are holding a large RRSP and telling yourself you will deal with it later, later is going to cost more than now would have. The fix here has a name I use with clients. Call it the strategic withdrawal ladder. Instead of taking $0 out of your RRSP year after year, you take just enough each year to fill up the lowest federal tax bracket, which sits at 14% up to $58,523 in 2026. You are not trying to avoid tax. You are choosing when to pay it, on your terms, at the lowest rate you will ever see again, instead of leaving the entire decision to a government formula 30 years from now. Let me show you why that timing matters so much. Picture two versions of the same retiree, both starting retirement at 65 with an $800,000 RRSP. In the first version, she takes $0 from that RRSP and lives entirely off her TFSA and a non-registered account. The RRSP keeps compounding untouched, year after year, and every dollar of that growth is still fully taxable the day it eventually comes out. By the time she turns 72 and the government forces the first RRIF withdrawal, the account has grown large enough that the mandatory 5.4% withdrawal alone comes to roughly $43,200 a year. Combine that with her CPP and OAS, and her total income crosses the $95,323 OAS clawback threshold before she has spent a dollar of it on purpose. In the second version, she starts pulling $25,000 a year from the same RRSP starting at 60, paying an average tax rate of around 8% on that income because it lands inside her personal credits and the lowest bracket. By 72, her RRSP has shrunk to roughly $400,000. Her mandatory withdrawal is now about $21,600, and she keeps her full OAS with room to spare. Same starting balance, same retirement length. The only difference is when the tax got paid. One version hands a chunk of the estate to the government through the clawback and a higher RRIF tax bill later. The other pays a small, predictable amount now and keeps control of the rest, year by year, instead of all at once. The government does not do this to be difficult. An RRSP is a deferral, not a permanent shelter, and the withdrawal schedule that starts at 65 is simply the timeline the deferral was always going to end on. The only real choice you have is whether you fill in some of that schedule early, on your own terms, using room you already have every single year, or leave the entire bill waiting for your 70s, all at once. I used to tell clients to defer taxes as long as possible, because that is what the textbooks say to do. I was wrong, or at least I was only half right. In a system where your RRSP keeps compounding and the government sets a hard deadline for withdrawals, deferral without a plan is not saving money. It is often just a quiet way of scheduling a bigger tax bill for your 70s at exactly the age when you have the least appetite for surprises. If you are within 5 years of retirement in Canada, and you would rather decide how this plays out than let the CRA decide for you, that is exactly the kind of planning worth digging into further, and it is why this channel exists. There is a tax most retirees never see coming because it does not show up as a line item anywhere on your notice of assessment. It is called the OAS recovery tax, and most people just call it the clawback. For 2026, once your net world income passes $95,323, you lose 15 cents of your OAS for every dollar above that line. Push far enough past it, somewhere around $155,109, and your entire OAS payment is gone. That is a wider swing than most retirees build into their plan, and it catches people off guard precisely because it never shows up as a separate line item anywhere. That threshold has not always kept pace with everyday costs. Grocery bills, property taxes, and heating costs have climbed faster in recent years than a lot of retirees expected when they first ran their numbers, and that has quietly pulled more middle-income retirees into range of the clawback, without their income actually feeling like it grew. Here is the part that makes it worse than it sounds. If you are already sitting in a tax bracket around 30% and a RRIF withdrawal pushes you past that clawback line, your real marginal rate on that next dollar is not 30%. It is closer to 45% because you are paying regular income tax and losing 15 cents of OAS on the exact same dollar. Ask yourself honestly whether you have ever actually checked what your marginal rate becomes in the year a big RRIF withdrawal lands, or whether you have just assumed your normal bracket still applies. Think about what a lost $1,000 or $1,500 of OAS actually means in a normal month. It is close to a property tax installment or several months of a pharmacy copay adding up quietly in the background. It rarely arrives as one dramatic hit. It shows up as a slightly smaller deposit, month after month, and most retirees never connect it back to a RRIF withdrawal they made the year before. Most people think of their TFSA as money set aside for something extra, a trip, a renovation, a bit of breathing room. Here is a different way to see it, that TFSA is your clawback insurance policy. Every dollar you pull from a TFSA instead of a RRIF in a year where your income is already close to that $95,323 line is a dollar that never counts against your OAS in the first place and never triggers that hidden 45% rate either. Meet Robert. He is 68, single, and has built up $600,000 in his RRSP over a long career. He lives comfortably off a small workplace pension and his CPP, and he has been deliberately keeping his taxable income around $40,000 a year because it feels responsible. He believes he is protecting himself from a big tax bill, and for years, on paper, it looks like it is working. At 72, the plan runs into a wall he did not build into it. The government requires his RRSP to be converted into a RRIF, and the mandatory withdrawal that year, combined with his pension and his CPP, pushes his total income up to roughly $105,000. Nothing about his spending changed. The number simply arrived, on schedule, whether he was ready for it or not. That number crosses the $95,323 OAS clawback threshold by close to $9,700. At 15 cents on every dollar over that line, Robert loses somewhere around $1,450 of OAS in that year alone. His marginal tax rate on that RRIF income jumps from around 20%, where he had comfortably sat for years, to close to 40% almost overnight. It is the kind of number that shows up on a notice of assessment and makes you read it twice. Robert did nothing wrong in the way most people would judge it. He was cautious. He kept his number low on purpose, the same way most of us were taught to. The problem was never his spending. It was the size of the account he left untouched for too long, and the mandatory schedule waiting for him at 72 that did not care how careful he had been in the years before it. Picture a different version of Robert, one who started drawing $20,000 a year from that same RRSP, starting at 65 instead of waiting. He would have stayed inside the lowest tax bracket the entire time, and by the time the mandatory RRIF withdrawal arrived, the account would have been small enough that his income never got close to that clawback line. Same career, same $600,000 starting point. A completely different outcome, just from choosing to take some of that money on his own schedule instead of the government's. Before we look at why so many people make Robert's choice anyway, it is worth asking what happens if the rules themselves feel like they could shift under you. If you do not fully trust that the government will leave your current plan alone for the next 20 years, that changes how you think about all of this too, and it is worth sitting with for a moment. It is a lot of money to lose over something that started out as a habit of caution. There is a well-documented bias behind why so many retirees do exactly what Robert did. It is called loss aversion, and it means the pain of writing a $5,000 check to the CRA today feels much bigger than the benefit of saving $50,000 10 years from now, even when the math clearly favors paying now. This is not a character flaw. It is how most people are wired, and it shows up in a lot of financial decisions, not just this one. It feels wrong to send money to the CRA when you technically do not have to yet. I understand that completely. You spent 40 years trying to keep that number as small as possible every single April, and now I am telling you the opposite might be true in retirement. That instinct does not disappear just because the rules changed underneath it, and there is nothing wrong with feeling that resistance the first few times. Here is a small shift that helps. Instead of measuring success by your annual tax bill, measure it by your lifetime tax bill across your entire retirement. A slightly higher number this year that leads to a meaningfully smaller number across the next 20 years is not a loss. It is the plan working the way it was supposed to, even when it feels uncomfortable in the moment you sign the withdrawal form. That gap between how a decision feels and what it actually costs is exactly where good retirement plans quietly get derailed. I remember a client who refused to touch his RRSP early because he wanted to buy a new truck using what he called tax-free TFSA money instead. On paper, he saved close to $4,000 in tax that one year, and it felt like a win at the time. By the time his estate settled, that same decision, repeated across several years, had cost roughly $80,000 more in RRIF and clawback tax than it needed to. That is not a trade anyone sets out to make on purpose. It just happens quietly, one reasonable feeling decision at a time, until the decisions add up to something much bigger than any single year ever suggested. Here is how to put this into practice without turning it into a full-time job. Start by calculating your own tax-free zone. For a single retiree in 2026, that is $27,660 once you stack the basic personal amount, the age amount, and the pension income amount. For a couple, it is $55,320 combined. This is the number you can bring in most years without owing federal tax at all. Next, find what I call your meltdown room. That is the gap between your current taxable income and the top of the 14% federal bracket, which sits at $58,523 for 2026. Any RRSP withdrawal that lands inside that room gets taxed at the lowest federal rate available to you, which is the entire point of doing this early instead of waiting. Use your TFSA for the lumpy, unpredictable spending, a new roof, a car repair, a larger trip, rather than for your everyday baseline income. Pulling a large TFSA withdrawal in the same year as a RRIF withdrawal can still spike your total income right into clawback territory, even though the TFSA withdrawal itself is never taxed on its own. Check your notice of assessment every year, not just at tax time. It tells you exactly where your net income landed the year before, which makes it far easier to see how much meltdown room you actually have left for the current year, instead of guessing. One simple number to keep in the back of your mind. Aim to keep your taxable income at least $5,000 below the $95,323 OAS clawback threshold, so an unexpected investment gain or a one-time payment does not accidentally tip you over the line. None of these steps requires guesswork once you know your own numbers, and each one takes only a few minutes to check. Retirement tax was never really about getting your bill down to $0. It is about paying the right amount, in the right year, on your own terms instead of the government's, and choosing that on purpose rather than by accident. You worked for decades to build this account. Do not let the discomfort of a smaller tax bill today talk you into a much larger one waiting at 72. The goal was never a zero on your tax return. The goal is keeping as much of what you earned as you reasonably can across your whole retirement, not just this one year, and passing on what is left to the people you choose instead of to a clawback formula. Every dollar you keep out of the clawback zone, or out of the highest brackets in your 70s, is a dollar that stays in your control, whether that means more comfort for you or more left for the people who come after you. If this helped you see the RRIF tax bomb before it goes off in your own plan, subscribe to the channel. We are here to help you keep more of what you spent a working lifetime building, one clear decision at a time. Taxes in retirement are closer to a long game of chess than a quick game of checkers. Make your move before the CRA makes theirs.